All right, welcome back. This is Chapter 10. We're going to talk briefly about the rise of hate groups in the United States. Like all forms of antisocial behavior, hate is learned behavior. For some, hate is intergenerational. That is to say, it's passed down from one family member to the next. Take this picture of this young man here being outfitted for his Klan robe. If you grew up in a family that was in the Ku Klux Klan, then there's very little chance of you escaping that lifestyle. You have been socialized since an early age to embrace the hate and the hateful messages of the hate groups to which your parents belonged. Now, most people aren't born into hate groups, they're actually recruited into them. And who are the most likely candidates to be recruited into a hate group? Well, just like with most odd groups out there in society, it is loners. So most extreme groups, whether they're religious cults or hate political movements, the most likely people to be recruited as new members are those who have very loose connections to society. They have weak family ties, they have weak links to social institutions such as churches and schools, they have spotty or weak employment histories. Let's take this young man here on the left. This is Dylan Roof. Dylan Roof is the person who killed 9 African American worshipers at the Emmanuel African Episcopal Methodist Church. African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. Now, Dylan is a 10th grade dropout. He is from a broken home. He had a very rough family life. He had no friends in school. In fact, he had to leave school in the 9th grade. He had to transfer schools in the 9th grade because he was getting bullied and picked on so much. He was a loner, and he had no friends, and he had a very bad home life. He was abused by his stepfather, not sexually abused, but just verbally and physically abused by his stepfather. And he is a great candidate to be recruited into an extreme group because of he had nothing going on for himself. And so he was drawn to the hate messages that he found on certain websites. And he was on, I think it's the Daily Stormer was one of the websites he was drawn to and participated in. And he bought into this hate group message and this message about racial superiority of whites. And whatever reason, he went to Charleston and killed people at a Bible study. He went in and pretended to be one of them and wanted to study the Bible with them, and then he just pulled out a gun and shot them. Shot 10 people, 9 of whom died. This over here on the right are just some people from a neo-Nazi group, and this guy right here, he looks like he might have had some issues growing up, and I could see him being a loner, or someone who they didn't, had a hard time making friends, and having weak, strong connections, doing well in school, etc. It is these types of people who just really have no other ties to society. They have weak bonds, as Hershey would say, who are most easily recruited into these hate movements. And that's where they get most members from, is recruiting new recruits. It's not people who are intergenerational passing down. It's people who are recruited into the new groups. That's where they get most of their new members from. These hate groups all have one thing really in common, and that is a firm belief in the coming race war. These groups are an ideology based on hate, based on racial purity, and based on racial superiority. It is not an economics movement. This is not about, I have lost my money, and this is, this is why I've joined this group. They're very pro-eugenics, and like I said, they spend lots of time training for this forthcoming race war. Now, I said this is not about economics, but let's talk a little bit of how when you talk to these people, you will find out that many of them hold anti-globalist views. And what I mean by that, all right, we're going to skip that right there. What I mean by that is that they hold views that they see the rise of a global economy as displacing a segment of society. In other words, they see the rise of globalization as displacing the white power structure in society. And the one reason why they're attracted to hate groups is because it gives them an opportunity to fight back against these nefarious powers that are destroying the white power structure in the United States. So how did this come about? Well, let's go back to the end of World War II. And from 1945 till 1980, when I was a sophomore in high school, we called this the golden age of capitalism. And what I mean by that is this is the 1945 to 1980 period is the strongest sustained economic growth cycle this country has ever had. So for 30 years of outstanding economic growth, rising economic opportunity. Now, countries that have sustained economic growth and development oftentimes have opportunities to pursue progressive social movements, such as the civil rights, such as the anti-poverty program started by Lyndon Johnson. Here's a picture on the left of Martin Luther King, and a picture on the right of Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson visiting a tar paper shack in Appalachia. Also, during the same time frame, we did something spectacular as a country. We went to the moon. We started the space program and landed someone on the moon, which was an incredible feat of engineering and teamwork. And when you have a nation that has extensive economic growth, the types of resources that are needed to generate these opportunities are there. Okay, so what happened? So this golden age of capitalism was also a period in which much of the economic growth was in the sector, what we call high school ready jobs. And these were jobs where you could graduate from high school and kind of walk right into the labor force. So in this period ended around 1977 is really the peak. I'm going to draw on here real quick. You see this peak here where I'm circling in red? This is 1977, and what this basically shows is about 22% of all non-farm payroll went into the manufacturing sector. In other words, they went into factory jobs. You see these guys over here building a car? This is being built in a factory in Detroit, Michigan. It's an American car. It's a GM of some sort, I think. It's maybe a Buick. I'm not sure. Can't really tell. But it is a classic case of the jobs that were created that were upwardly mobile jobs were those that basically you graduate from high school, you had a very good chance of getting a job in a factory somewhere, and that factory job you keep it for the rest of your life, and it will sustain you. It will give you retirement benefits. You will be able to buy a house. You'll be able to put your kids through college. It gives you a pension plan and health insurance, all of these great benefits. These were really good, solid jobs. Okay, but as you see here, this is 1977, and you get into the 1980s, you see a sharp drop, and you see a little pickup again. But around 1990, here, well, here's 1990 right here. This is sort of the beginning of the end. So starting in 1990, we've had a continual slide. I mean, it was a little bit of a pickup in the percentage or the concentration of these types of jobs in our economy. Today, less than 10% of payroll goes into manufacturing jobs, or what we call high school ready jobs. Okay. Now, what does this mean? Well, it means we've had a system of dislocation for a large segment of our population. So we started the decline of manufacturing in 1990. These guys here on the left, this is the picture from the previous screen. They're making this car. This is the factory in which that car was made. It is now shuttered. So these guys they probably lost their jobs when this factory closed. Their kids, who probably expected an opportunity to work in that factory, there's no factory there for them to work in anymore, okay? Maybe their dads worked in this factory. So what we see is the loss of jobs, of upwardly mobile jobs, jobs that would give you a good quality of life. They are gone. They are left and gone overseas, particularly for people who don't have lots of education. And beginning in the year 2000, it's been going on for 20 years now, we saw the pace of job loss accelerate. Okay, so it was bad from 90 to 2000, but from 2000 to 2020, the pace has really accelerated. We've lost even more jobs and at a faster rate. Where are these jobs gone? Primarily, they've gone overseas. So here, this is a picture of Mexico, late 1990s Mexico. And this is the Maquiladores region where you had lots of U.S. factories. And here's just actually a picture of all the factories kind of lined up at each other. So the factory jobs left the United States, it went down to Mexico. Why would they go to Mexico? Cheap labor, cheaper, less strict environmental regulations. And also, Mexico's still close to the United States. We're still the #1 consumer of manufactured products. And so what the automobile industry started manufacturing cars, shipping them down to Mexico in parts, and then workers in the Mexican factories would assemble the cars for pennies on the dollar in the cost of the United States. And then they'd ship the assembled car back to the United States for final inspection and then distribution to dealerships. The second force that has really hurt the loss of high school ready jobs is technology. So in that picture, a couple of slides ago, we showed two guys making a car in Detroit, right? Well, that was reality in the 1970s. In the year 2020, machines make cars. There are a couple of guys working back there. You can kind of see them basically back there. But for the most part, the assembly line is now mechanized. Where we used to have people working on cars, we now have machines doing it. And frankly, the robots are more effective. They don't make mistakes at the same rate that humans do. The robots can work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without getting tired, without breaking down. So the cost of production with machines is actually much lower than it is with human labor. And that sounds great for the bottom line, but what does it mean for the people who used to work these jobs who now don't have these opportunities? It means that they're struggling financially. And here's a chart to show you how much we're struggling financially. So these are household wages from 1967 until 2012, okay? And what you can see here is that if we were to draw a line right here, maybe I'll draw a line of something other than, let's draw it in green because that'll make it, that's the money color, right? All right, draw it in green right there. See the green line? That should be straight. Assume, pretend that line's straight. 75% of households are below this green line. 25% of households are above this green line. All right, so what does this mean? That means for 75% of households, look at the earnings. They're not going up. They've stayed flat over time. Okay? Only one group has really seen a significant rise in household income since 1967, and that is the top 5% of households, right? They've had a very strong increase in income. The other 20%, a little bit of increase in income. But for 75% of households, people's earnings haven't gone up. And these dollars are inflation adjusted. And what that means is that it just takes into account the fact that cost of living goes up a little bit each year. Here's the problem. Wages haven't gone up, but the cost of goods, the inelastic goods, the goods we really need, to survive, have gone up beyond the cost of inflation. So automobiles are really expensive now. They're much more expensive than they were 25 years ago. Why is that? Well, it's partly because there's so much more technology involved in making automobiles. But a new automobile is a lot more expensive than it used to be, and the price of cars has greatly surpassed the rise of inflation. So that means you need more of your money to buy the same car as you did 30 years ago, but your money is not really going up any. Same thing when it comes to health insurance. When I first started working in a university in early 1990s, my health insurance was $35 a week, which was, pretty good rate. Now it's over $500 a month what I pay out of pocket. And I have the exact same coverage. It's my wife and I right now, and at the time it was my wife and I. It's gone from $35 a week to well over $500 a month out of costs, and I have no new coverage that I didn't have in early 1990s. So it's just the cost of healthcare is skyrocketing at a rate much greater than inflation. College education, oh my gosh, the cost of tuition. In 1985, I paid like $600 a semester to go to school. Tuition and a lot of other costs, but just tuition was like $600 a semester. I went to a state school in South Carolina. Today, my same state school in South Carolina, in-state tuition is $5,500 a semester. And the difference between $5,500 and $600 is, $4,900. That is not because of inflation. That's because the actual costs of going to college have gone up much higher than inflation. But this is a problem for most Americans, for 75% of Americans, because our wages are not going up. They're staying flat. And why are they staying flat? Largely because of globalization, because we're having to compete with other countries for wages and jobs, because the kind of jobs that were there in the 70s and early 80s, the factory jobs, aren't there today to support a very large proportion of our population. Tough times. It's really tough times. It has been for the last 25 years or so for workers without a college degree. We as a society are much more productive, but our income is not growing. And this chart here, I'm not going to go into the chart, but you can take a look at it. It's in your PowerPoint slide. It'll show you that up until the last 15, 20 years, our wages stayed constant with our productivity level. And in the last 15 years, productivity has gone way up, but our wages have gone flat. And what we've seen is, we talked a little bit about this earlier this semester, we've seen the rise of foreclosures, rise in suicides. So who's the most likely to commit suicide? It is middle-aged white guys, and particularly those who live in rural communities. And we've just seen an emergence of economic desperation. Who's to blame for this? Well, some blame globalization. Others blame the elites, the bankers, the government officials, international trade, the corporate fat cats. We saw this in the Occupy Wall Street movement. Others blame immigrants who are coming here and we're letting in too easily, who are willing to work for much less. We've seen that in the rise of Donald Trump as a populist president. So we each, whether you're liberal or conservative, you're all suffering to some extent this wage stagnation, and we seek to blame it on entities that are, we each have our own villain. We blame it on. The point is, this economic dislocation has made hate groups more attractive to a certain segment of the population, particularly those who have suffered the most under globalization. So we've seen the rise of nationalist sentiment and movement. The American First movement is a nationalist movement, and anti-immigrant movement is a nationalist movement. We've seen the rise of some, for example, like the New Socialist Party, which I'm going to skip over because they're kind of defunct. Let's go down here. We've seen the rise of other white nationalist movements. In 2019, we had over 1,000 hate groups in the United States. White nationalists make up about 2/3 of that group. There are also black nationalist groups out there, about 264. The three big white nationalist groups right now are Identity Europa, the Patriot Front, and the American Freedom Party. So what are these groups? What are they into? Well, they want three things. One is they want the organizing principle of the country should be based on the concepts of white identity and Western civilization. They want to preserve what they call white racial hegemony, that is to say, the white power structure. They're very much in support of eugenics movements. They believe that whites are eugenically superior to other races. They also want to reverse forthcoming demographic changes. By the year 2040, the white non-Hispanic population will no longer be a statistical majority. It'll be less than 50% of our population. White nationalists play this up as a reason to be concerned. If you're a white person, you should be worried about this. One of the things that some of their crazier plans include ideas about increasing the white birth rate. In other words, trying to have encourage white people to have more children. And they've got some bizarre plans, one of which they borrowed from the Nazis, the Lebensborn plan from the Nazis, bizarre. They want to increase the white birth rate, and they also want to decrease all non-white immigration. They want to end all non-white immigration. The other thing they'd like to do is reverse some of the court cases that are, and this kind of really shows the deep dark side of this group. They want to ban interracial marriage in children, what's called miscegenation. So this is really kind of back to dangerous eugenics, sterilization, euthanasia kind of stuff here. But the point is, it's a group of people who are afraid. They're afraid that they're, for the first time in their lives, they're losing power. They're not going to be in charge anymore. They don't like the idea that the world is becoming more global, and that in their minds, at least, white people are losing identity and power. For those who have been economically dislocated by globalization, this kind of message, for some, not all, I shouldn't say that, for some who've been dislocated by globalization, this is an attractive message. And it explains why white nationalist groups have been growing and why they've been able to attract new members over the last 5 to 10 years, is because this message sells. They're playing on people's fears, and they're trying to paint a picture of America in the future that's going to be dark and sinister and non-white. And they're trying to get people to join this movement and to join their causes, and more importantly, to donate money to their causes.